Commander Ethan Carter stood at the edge of the hangar bay, his eyes fixed on the alien ship that hovered just above the ground. The Zerin, an ancient alien race, had called for him. After months of traveling through deep space, Ethan had expected a diplomatic mission. Instead, he found himself in a situation beyond his understanding. His ship, the Celestial Dawn, had docked on a massive Zerin station, floating among the stars. This was no ordinary meeting. The Zerin had invited him, but no one had explained why. Ethan was a highly trained commander, someone who had spent his life protecting humanity's interests in the far reaches of space. He had seen strange things, alien species, massive galactic anomalies, and countless dangers. But nothing prepared him for this moment. A figure emerged from the shadows of the station. She was tall, almost glowing, with an ethereal presence that radiated authority. Her skin shimmered like polished stone, with delicate patterns that pulsed gently, hinting at her age and wisdom. This was Velraya, the High Priestess of the Zerin. Ethan straightened his posture as she approached, her eyes locked on his. There was something deep in those eyes, something ancient, wise, and perhaps burdened. He knew she was more than just a leader. She was the heart of her people. "Commander Carter," Velraya spoke, her voice like a soft hum, smooth and resonant. "I have chosen you." Ethan blinked, confused. Chosen? For what? The High Priestess didn't answer immediately. She motioned for him to follow her as they walked deeper into the station, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the quiet corridors. The walls of the station were covered in strange, glowing symbols, their meanings unknown to him. It felt as though the very walls were alive, watching him. They arrived at a large chamber, its walls lined with alien technology and intricate designs. In the center stood an altar, glowing with an eerie light. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. Velraya turned to face him, her expression calm yet intense. "You have been chosen to participate in an ancient ritual, one that will shape the future of my people." Ethan frowned. "Ritual? I'm no priest, or whatever you call it. I'm a soldier. I came here to negotiate, not to be part of some strange ceremony." The High Priestess' eyes softened, but there was no humor in her gaze. "This ritual is vital to the survival of my species. For centuries, the Zerin have relied on our biological processes to reproduce. But our species is dying. We have failed to reproduce naturally for generations. Our population is dwindling. This ritual is the last hope for my people." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "Wait a minute. You're saying you want me to help you reproduce?" His voice was filled with disbelief. Velraya nodded. "Yes, your genetic structure is the key. We have studied humans for some time, and we believe your biology holds the answer to our survival." Ethan's mind raced. He had known the Zerin were an advanced species, but he hadn't expected this. To be chosen for something like this, for a ritual of reproduction, it was absurd. But as he looked at Velraya's solemn face, he realized this wasn't a decision made lightly. There was no malice in her eyes, only desperation and a strange kind of hope. "What exactly does this ritual involve?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "The ritual," Velraya explained, "is a sacred process where a human male is linked with a Zerin female to transfer life force, creating offspring that will carry both species' DNA. It is ancient, and it is necessary for the Zerin to survive." Ethan's mind was spinning. He had seen plenty of strange things in his travels, but nothing like this. It was hard to believe. He was just a human. How could he possibly be the key to saving an entire alien race? It didn't make sense. "I'm not a scientist," Ethan said slowly. "I don't understand how your genetics work, or why I'm being asked to do this. There must be another way." The High Priestess remained silent for a moment, her gaze intense. "There is no other way, Commander. We have tried everything. Our people are dying, and this is our last hope. You are the chosen one, whether you believe it or not." Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He was a soldier, used to handling dangerous situations, but this was different. This wasn't a mission he could solve with weapons or tactics. This was something far beyond his training. "Will I have a choice in this?" he asked, his voice quieter now, almost uncertain. Velraya met his gaze with a long, searching look. "You are free to leave at any time, but the Zarin will not survive without this ritual. Your people may not know us, but we are facing extinction. I have chosen you, Commander, not because I want you, but because you are the key." Ethan stood there, unsure of what to say. He had never been in a situation like this before. But one thing was clear. The Zarin were not just asking for help. They were begging for it. The decision weighed heavily on him. Could he truly turn his back on a species facing extinction? And if he agreed, what would this ritual do to him? What would it do to the future of his species? As the High Priestess led him deeper into the chamber, Ethan realized that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was about to become part of something far greater than he could ever understand. Ethan sat in the cold, metallic room, his mind still racing. The Zarin's High Priestess, Velraya, had left him alone to think, but the silence only made things harder. His thoughts were a whirlwind. Confusion, disbelief, and a growing sense of dread. Why had he been chosen? What did this ritual really mean for him? The walls of the chamber were covered in strange symbols that glowed softly in the dim light, casting long shadows across the floor. Ethan had seen alien technologies before, but this place felt different. It felt ancient, almost as if the room itself held memories of long-forgotten times. It made him uneasy. Suddenly, the door opened with a soft hiss. Velraya entered, her presence as powerful as ever. She walked toward him with a steady, graceful pace, her glowing markings faintly pulsing with each step. There was no hurry in her movements, as if she knew that time was both her ally and her enemy. "I see you have questions," she said, her voice calm and steady. Ethan stood up, trying to steady his own racing thoughts. "I have more than questions. You say I'm the key to saving your species, but how exactly is this ritual supposed to work? You said it would transfer life force. What does that even mean?" Velraya paused for a moment, as though carefully choosing her words. "The Zarin were once a thriving species, Commander. We lived in harmony with our world, with each other. But over time, our way of life changed. We became more dependent on technology, and our biology began to weaken. Our ability to reproduce naturally has failed, and the population has dwindled. We are dying, slowly but surely." Ethan frowned, trying to understand. "So, you're saying your species has lost the ability to have children?" Velraya nodded. "Yes, our bodies can no longer create life on their own. We rely on advanced technology to try and reproduce, but the results have been unstable. Our genetic makeup is breaking down, and we cannot fix it without help." Ethan felt a weight settle in his chest. "But why me? Why a human? I'm just a soldier. I don't know anything about your biology." The High Priestess took a step closer, her eyes softening. "We have studied humans for a long time. Your species is unique in many ways. Your genetics are strong, adaptable. You can survive in conditions that would destroy other beings. It's in your DNA. Your ability to adapt, to evolve quickly. We believe that by combining your strength with ours, we can restore our species." Ethan's mind was still trying to catch up with everything she had said. "So, you want to mix our genetics? That's how this ritual works?" "No," Velraya answered firmly. "It's more than just a simple mix of genes. The ritual involves a life force transfer. It's a sacred process, where the essence of one species is given to the other. It's not just about biology. It's about saving our soul, our future." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. A transfer of life force. "That sounds dangerous." "It is," Velraya admitted, her voice now tinged with sadness. "But it is our only option. Our people have tried other ways, but nothing has worked. Without this ritual, we will cease to exist." Ethan tried to understand, but the more he heard, the more complicated it became. "But if I agree to this, what happens to me? You said there's a risk. Will I survive it?" The High Priestess looked at him with a mix of compassion and sorrow. "The ritual is not without danger. It is powerful and untested, even for us. The life force transfer can be overwhelming. It may change you in ways you cannot predict. But we believe it is the only way for us to survive. And you are the key, Commander." Ethan took a deep breath. His mind was spinning, but his sense of duty as a soldier kicked in. He couldn't just walk away from a species that was on the brink of extinction. They were asking for his help, whether he understood it fully or not. The Zerin's survival depended on him. "Is there no other way?" Ethan asked, his voice quieter now. Velrea's expression softened, but there was no hope in her eyes. "We have tried everything else. This is our last chance." Ethan stared at her, torn between his fear of the unknown and his need to do something, anything, to help. He had been in dangerous situations before, but nothing like this. No weapons or strategy could solve this problem. This wasn't about fighting. It was about survival. It wasn't just his life at risk. It was the future of an entire species. The High Priestess waited silently, giving him space to process. After a long pause, Ethan finally spoke. "I'll do it." Velrea's eyes flashed with something that looked like relief. "You are brave, Commander. You don't know the weight of the decision you've made, but you are the one we've been waiting for." Ethan didn't feel brave. He felt like he was being swept into something much bigger than himself, something he didn't understand. But he had made his choice. He couldn't turn his back on them now. "Tell me what I need to do," he said, his voice steady. Velrea gave him a nod, and the two of them walked toward the center of the chamber. The altar was bathed in soft, green light, and the air seemed to hum with a strange energy. As Ethan stepped closer, he felt the weight of his decision settle in. This ritual, this strange, dangerous transfer, was about to change everything. The chamber felt colder as Ethan stood before the altar, his heart pounding in his chest. The air was thick with tension, and the soft hum of the chamber's strange energy filled the space. He had made the decision to help the Zerin, but now that the moment had arrived, doubts began to creep in. What would this ritual really do to him? Was he prepared for what lay ahead? Velrea, the High Priestess, stood beside him, her face calm but her eyes reflecting the weight of centuries of tradition. She had explained the basics of the ritual, but there were still many unknowns. Ethan wasn't sure if that made him nervous or if it was the Zerin's strange presence that unsettled him. "The ritual will begin soon," Velrea said, her voice steady and soothing. "You have shown courage, Commander. Now, all that is left is to trust in the process. Trust in the life force that flows through us all." Ethan nodded, but inside, he felt a storm of questions. Would he survive this? What would happen when the ritual transferred the life force? Was he truly the key to saving an entire species, or was he just a pawn in a larger game? He couldn't help but wonder if he was making the biggest mistake of his life. The High Priestess stepped back, her hands raised toward the ceiling. A soft glow began to radiate from her body, and the symbols on the walls seemed to pulse in response. It was as though the very room itself was alive, alive with ancient energy that had been waiting for this moment. "Prepare yourself," Velrea said. "The energy you will experience is unlike anything you felt before. It will flow through you, connecting our life forces. The transfer is powerful, but it will also bring us closer to the future we seek." Ethan took a deep breath, steadying himself. He couldn't back out now. He had given his word, and despite his doubts, he knew he had to see this through. His fingers clenched into fists at his sides, his pulse quickening as he waited for the ritual to begin. The air grew warmer as Velrea's voice resonated softly, speaking words that sounded ancient, as though they were passed down from a time long forgotten. Ethan didn't understand the language, but he could feel the power in her voice. The walls around them seemed to vibrate with the energy she was calling upon. Then, without warning, the light around them intensified, and Ethan felt something stir deep within him. It was as if a part of him was being drawn out, and another part of him was being connected to something far greater. The energy was overwhelming, but strangely comforting. It was like a warm embrace, pulling him into a world he couldn't fully understand, but somehow instinctively knew was important. Ethan felt a sharp, sudden sensation, as if his very being was being pulled in two directions. It wasn't painful, but it was unlike anything he had ever experienced. His body trembled, and his mind swirled with images and emotions he couldn't place. His thoughts began to blur together as the ritual took hold. He felt his heart racing, his blood pulsing in his veins. "Stay with me, Commander," Velrea's voice called out, firm and reassuring. "Focus on the life force. Let it guide you. Let it connect us." Ethan struggled to keep his thoughts clear, but it was getting harder to focus. The sensation was growing stronger, more intense. He could feel something. Someone else inside him, a presence that was not his own, yet somehow familiar. It wasn't just a physical connection. It was spiritual, emotional, as if their very souls were intertwining. His breath came in shallow gasps, and he felt himself falling into the light. Time seemed to stretch and warp, like he was floating in a vast ocean of energy, unable to tell where his own being ended and where the Zaren's life force began. Through the haze of sensations, Ethan heard Velrea's voice once again, more distant now, as if it was coming from somewhere far away. "Do not fear the change. It is the only way forward. You are the bridge between our people and our future. You are the hope we have long waited for." Her words seemed to echo in his mind, and in that moment, he understood. This wasn't just about saving a species, it was about bringing something new into the universe, a fusion of life, a blending of two worlds, one human, one alien, bound by a shared destiny. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on him, but at the same time, he felt a deep sense of purpose. As the light grew brighter, Ethan's thoughts became fragmented, and everything he knew seemed to slip away. But there was one thing that remained clear. He had chosen to be here. He had chosen to help. And in that moment, he realized that he wasn't just helping the Zaren. He was also helping himself, finding a connection to something greater than anything he had ever known. The energy continued to flow, now swirling around him in a dance of light and shadow. His body felt as if it were being remade, reformed by the power of the ritual. He felt both weak and strong at the same time, like he was being torn apart and rebuilt, his very essence being transformed into something new. "Trust the process," Velrea's voice called out again, her tone steady and reassuring. "You are not alone in this, Commander." Ethan closed his eyes, letting go of his fears and doubts. He let the ritual take over, allowing the life force to guide him, to shape him, to forge a future for the Zaren and for humanity. The ritual was far from over, but for the first time since he had arrived on the station, Ethan felt as though he was where he needed to be. And with that, the transfer continued, pulling him deeper into the unknown. Ethan's senses were overloaded as the energy surged through him. It was no longer just a pull, like something trying to connect him to the Zaren. It was more like a wave, crashing over him, overwhelming him with feelings, sensations, and images. He had never experienced anything so intense in his life. It was as if his body had become part of the very fabric of the universe, and every heartbeat echoed with the pulse of the Zaren's world. The light around them swirled, casting shadows and shapes that seemed to dance with a life of their own. The chamber, once cold and sterile, now felt alive, humming with the power of the ritual. The air was thick with energy, almost electric, as though it had a mind of its own. Ethan could feel it vibrating through his skin, his muscles, his bones. It was like the very atoms of his body were being rearranged. He tried to breathe, but it felt like the air was too dense, like he couldn't get enough into his lungs. Panic started to rise in his chest. This wasn't what he had expected. This was more. Much more. Was this normal? He tried to look at Veloraya, to ask if everything was going according to plan, but his vision blurred, and all he could see was the bright, shifting light that surrounded them both. "Stay focused, Commander." Veloraya's voice broke through his thoughts, calm and firm, like a lifeline in a storm. "Let the power flow through you. Do not resist it. You are meant for this." But how could he not resist? The energy felt like it was tearing him apart, like it was going to consume him whole. He gritted his teeth and closed his eyes, trying to center himself. He had to trust her. He had to trust the process, as she kept telling him. A sudden image flashed before his eyes. A Zerin child, bright eyes filled with hope, reaching out with tiny hands. It wasn't a vision he expected. It felt real, like a memory that wasn't his own. His breath caught in his throat. The child's eyes seemed to lock onto his, and for a brief moment, he felt like he could understand their pain, their need. Their future depended on this. His future, too, was bound up in this moment. "You are the key." Veloraya's voice echoed again, more distant now, as though it was coming from a place beyond time and space. "The Zerin have waited for you, and now you are part of something much greater than yourself." The words echoed in his mind, and for the first time, he felt a sense of clarity. This ritual wasn't just about saving the Zerin. It was about joining two worlds, two species, in a bond that could transcend everything they knew. It was bigger than he could have ever imagined. And then, the energy shifted again, pulling him deeper. Ethan gasped, feeling as though he were being stretched, his very soul being torn between two forces. But at the same time, he could feel something else, something warm and comforting. Veloraya's presence. She was guiding him through this, helping him stay grounded, even as everything else around him seemed to be in flux. The air seemed to thicken once more, and a pulse of energy surged through his chest, causing him to stumble. His body was struggling to keep up with the changes, but he fought through the overwhelming sensation. He had no choice but to endure. He had come this far. There was no turning back. For a moment, everything went dark, and Ethan felt like he was falling into an endless void. His mind screamed in panic, but there was no sound. There was only silence, deep and all-encompassing. But then he felt a sudden shift. The darkness receded, replaced by the bright light once again. And with it came a strange calm. It was as if a part of him had been set free, no longer struggling against the energy, but moving with it, allowing it to flow through him without resistance. Ethan's thoughts were clearer now. The fear, the panic, they were gone, replaced by something far more powerful. Purpose. He realized, deep down, that this connection with the Zerin wasn't just about saving them. It was about understanding them, about becoming part of something that transcended boundaries. Humanity, for all its flaws, had something unique. They had the ability to adapt, to learn, to become part of something greater. The ritual wasn't simply about reproduction, as Veloraya had said. It was about unity. It was about the strength of shared experience and the power that came from joining forces for a common goal. It wasn't about him being used. It was about him being part of something extraordinary. Ethan's mind began to clear as the ritual reached its peak. The light around him became blinding, but instead of fear, he felt awe. He understood now that the Zerin weren't asking for help just to survive. They were asking for help to thrive, to build a future that they couldn't create on their own. And in that moment, Ethan realized he wasn't just helping them. He was helping all of them, including himself. A deep, resonating pulse filled the chamber, vibrating through every fiber of his being. It wasn't just energy, it was life itself. The power surged again, and Ethan could feel it merging with him, becoming a part of him. He was no longer an outsider. He was no longer just a human. He was connected to something far bigger. As the pulse of energy began to fade, the chamber grew quiet once more. The light softened, and Ethan opened his eyes. He felt different. The energy of the ritual had subsided, but the bond it had created remained. Veldrea was standing in front of him now, her expression serene, but her eyes were filled with a deep gratitude. She nodded at him, a silent acknowledgement of the change that had taken place. "You have done it, Commander," she said softly. "You have joined with us. You are a part of the future of the Zerin." And for the first time, Ethan understood. He wasn't just a bridge. He was a part of a new world. Ethan stood in the center of the chamber, still feeling the lingering effects of the ritual. The air around him was still charged with the energy that had flooded his body only moments ago. But now, instead of feeling overwhelmed, he felt calm. He could still sense the connection, but it wasn't as overpowering as before. It was more like a quiet hum, a constant presence in the back of his mind. Veldrea was watching him closely, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite read. There was a deep respect there, but also a quiet understanding. She stepped forward, and her voice was soft, but it carried a weight that made Ethan listen carefully. "You have changed," she said. "The ritual has bound you to us, to our people, but it has also changed you in ways you cannot yet understand. The connection is more than just physical. It is mental, spiritual. You are now part of the Zerin." Ethan took a deep breath, trying to process her words. Part of him was still unsure about everything. He had gone from being a stranger on an alien world to being chosen for something that seemed far beyond anything he could comprehend. But somehow, deep down, he felt a strange peace in the decision he had made. He had become more than just a bystander in their struggle for survival. He had become a partner in it. I don't know if I can fully understand it yet," Ethan admitted, his voice hesitant. "But I can feel it. I feel different. It's like I'm connected to you, to all of you. And I don't know how, but I know it's important." Veldrea nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "You will understand more in time. This bond we share is not just for survival. It is for something greater, something that will benefit both the Zerin and your people." Her words sent a ripple of curiosity through Ethan. He had always known that humanity's future lay in the stars, but this was something he hadn't expected. He had thought his mission was just about helping the Zerin. But now, it seemed like it was something bigger, something that could change everything. As he stood there, absorbing the gravity of the moment, he realized that the Zerin were not just a species trying to survive. They were trying to evolve, to move forward. They wanted more than just peace. They wanted progress, unity, and a future where their people could thrive again. And somehow, Ethan had become part of that future. Veldrea stepped back, her posture straight and commanding. "The Zerin have always been a people of wisdom, but we have lost much. The ritual you just completed was not just for the survival of our species. It was a path to something greater. The knowledge, the power, the unity we have gained through this connection will allow us to rebuild, to grow. And we will need your help to guide us." Ethan's heart raced as he took in her words. It wasn't just about the Zerin anymore. This was about both species working together to build something stronger. He had been a part of the ritual, a part of the bond, but now it seemed like he was being asked to be a part of their future too. "But what can I do?" Ethan asked, his voice uncertain. "I'm just one human. I don't know much about your culture, your technology, your ways. How can I help in something so big?" Veldrea's eyes softened as she looked at him. "It is not just knowledge or technology that we need. It is your strength, your resilience, and your ability to think differently. You are a human. You are a species that has fought and survived against overwhelming odds. That is something we need. We need your perspective, your courage." Ethan felt a surge of pride at her words. He had always known that humanity was strong, but hearing it from the mouth of an alien leader made it feel real in a way he hadn't anticipated. Maybe humanity had more to offer the universe than he had ever realized. "I don't know if I'm ready," he said quietly, though part of him knew he was more prepared than he had ever been. "But I'll try." Velrea's smile widened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. That is all we ask. We are no longer two separate species. We are bound together, and together we will rise. The words echoed in Ethan's mind, and for the first time since he arrived on Zarin, he truly believed them. They weren't just words. They were a promise that he wasn't alone in this, that he wasn't just a human caught in the middle of an alien conflict. He was part of something much bigger. The future of the Zarin, and perhaps even humanity's future, was now intertwined with this moment. As he turned to leave the chamber, he felt a sense of purpose he had never felt before. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was clear that this was the beginning of something extraordinary. He wasn't just an observer anymore. He was a participant, and he would do whatever it took to help them build a future where both their people could thrive. Ethan woke up early the next morning, his mind still swirling from the events of the previous day. The connection with the Zarin had become stronger overnight, a constant hum in his thoughts. He couldn't escape it, not that he wanted to. There was something oddly comforting about it now, a presence that made him feel like he belonged, like he was part of something bigger than himself. As he stood up from the bed in his quarters, he felt the weight of what Velrea had said. His role wasn't just as an ally to the Zarin anymore. It was something more, something much greater than he could have imagined. The bond between them wasn't just about survival. It was about evolution, progress, and a shared future. A future that would require him to be more than just a human. He had to become a leader, a guide, a bridge between two worlds. He sighed, rubbing his eyes. This wasn't what he had signed up for. He had come to Zarin simply to help, to offer his knowledge and skills. But now, it felt like he was being thrust into something much more complex, something that he wasn't sure he was ready for. But he had no choice. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the survival of two species, working together for a future none of them could predict. As he walked down the corridors of the Zarin temple, he was greeted by the familiar faces of the alien people, all of them showing quiet respect. They had begun to look at him differently, too. The human who had come from Earth had become part of their future, a key figure in the plan to rebuild their world. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted when he saw Velrea waiting for him in the main hall. Her presence was commanding, yet there was a calmness about her, as if she knew something he didn't. "Ethan," she said, her voice smooth and reassuring. "We have much to discuss." Ethan nodded, walking toward her. He could see the seriousness in her eyes, the weight of the responsibility she was carrying, and he couldn't help but wonder if she was feeling the same pressure he was. "I'm ready," he said, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "Are you?" Velrea asked, her gaze sharp. "Are you truly ready to lead?" Ethan paused. The question took him by surprise. He had been thinking about the future, but he hadn't really considered the full implications of what it meant to lead, to guide the Zarin and humanity together into a new era. He had spent so much time trying to catch up, trying to understand everything that had happened to him, but now he realized that he couldn't keep running from the reality. This was his future, and he had to step up. "I don't know if I'm ready," he admitted, "but I'll try. I have to try." Velrea studied him for a moment before nodding. "That is enough. The path ahead will be difficult. The challenges we face are beyond what you or I could have ever imagined. But the bond we share, human and Zarin, it will be our strength. Together, we can accomplish what was once thought impossible." Ethan swallowed hard. He knew the stakes were high, but in that moment, something clicked within him. He wasn't alone. The Zarin had become his family, and he would fight for their survival just as much as he would for his own. And with that thought, he felt a surge of resolve that he hadn't felt before. "What do we do first?" Ethan asked. "We start by bringing your people into this," Velrea replied, her voice steady. "The Zarin can't do this alone. And the human race has far more to offer than we initially realized. You must return to Earth and make contact. It's time to bring humanity into this alliance." Ethan's stomach twisted. He had been dreading this moment. The idea of explaining the situation to Earth, of convincing his people to trust the Zerin, seemed like an impossible task. He wasn't even sure if Earth was ready to hear the truth about what had happened. But he also knew that they didn't have a choice. The Zerin needed Earth's help, and humanity needed theirs. The future of both species depended on cooperation, on understanding. "I'll do it," he said, his voice more certain now. "I'll go back to Earth. I'll make them see." Velraya placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm but comforting. "We will send you back with everything you need. The Zerin will aid you, and together, we will find a way to unite our peoples." Ethan felt a rush of determination. The path ahead was uncertain, and he knew the challenges would be immense. But he also knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when the future of both the Zerin and humanity was on the line. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, looking Velraya in the eyes. "We'll make this work." Velraya nodded, her eyes full of quiet pride. "I believe you, Ethan. You have become more than just a human to us. You are part of the Zerin now, and together we will forge a new future." As Ethan left the temple, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey ahead was uncertain, but he wasn't afraid anymore. He had a mission, and he knew that with Velraya and the Zerin by his side, they would make it through whatever came their way. Ethan stood at the edge of the Zerin ship's landing platform, staring out at the vast expanse of space before him. The stars twinkled like distant promises, and for a moment he felt small. But as his eyes lingered on the distant horizon, he felt the weight of the decision he had made. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was a symbol of hope, of unity between two species that had once been strangers. The time had come. The Zerin were ready to help him return to Earth, but this time the stakes were even higher. Earth's leaders had been given the news, and now it was up to him to convince them that joining forces with the Zerin was humanity's only chance for survival. But even with all the preparations, Ethan knew this wasn't going to be easy. The idea of an alien alliance was a hard sell. Many would reject it, dismiss it as a fantasy, or worse, a threat. But he also knew that the survival of both worlds depended on cooperation. He couldn't afford to fail. He turned to Velraya, who was standing beside him, her presence as strong as ever. She had become more than just an ally. She was his partner in every sense of the word. The bond between them was undeniable, a connection that went beyond words. In her eyes, he could see the same hope, the same determination that burned in his heart. "Are you ready?" Velraya asked, her voice calm but full of purpose. Ethan nodded, though his stomach twisted in anticipation. "I have to be." "We will be with you, every step of the way," Velraya said. "The Zerin are not just sending you back alone. We have equipped you with the knowledge, the technology, and the means to make this work. You will not fail, Ethan." He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. The ship hummed quietly around him, its energy vibrating through the floor beneath his feet. It was a constant reminder that he was part of something much larger than himself. The journey back to Earth was long, and the silence between him and Velraya spoke volumes. She respected his need for solitude, but he could feel her presence beside him, a quiet reassurance that he wasn't facing this alone. Together, they had come so far. Together, they had built something that could change the course of history. After what felt like an eternity, the Zerin ship entered Earth's atmosphere, the blue planet coming into view below. Ethan's heart raced. This was it, the moment he had been preparing for. He looked down at the surface, wondering how humanity would react. Would they accept the truth? Would they see the Zerin as allies or enemies? As the ship touched down, Ethan knew there was no turning back. The doors opened, and he stepped out onto the familiar soil of Earth, the weight of the world on his shoulders. There were already representatives waiting for him, human diplomats and military officers who had been briefed on the situation. Ethan squared his shoulders, his eyes scanning the crowd. He could see the skepticism in their eyes, the doubt that hung in the air like a heavy fog. But he didn't let it deter him. He had come too far to back down now. He stepped forward, his voice clear and steady. "I know this may seem impossible," he began, addressing the crowd before him. "But we, as humans, have a choice to make. Our world is facing challenges we cannot overcome alone. The Zarin are not our enemies. They are our allies, and together, we can achieve things we never thought possible." There was a murmur among the crowd. Some looked uncertain, others intrigued. But Ethan could see a shift. He wasn't just speaking to them as a human anymore. He was speaking as someone who had shared in the Zarin struggles, someone who understood their culture, their history, and their hope for a better future. "We are facing a new kind of war, one that threatens not just Earth, but the very fabric of our existence," Ethan continued. "But this war is not just against alien invaders. It's against time, against resources, against everything that keeps our world and theirs apart. We can no longer afford to fight alone. We need each other." He paused, letting the words sink in. He had said the truth, plain and simple. There was no room for denial now. They had a choice. They could continue fighting among themselves, or they could join forces with the Zarin and build a future that was stronger than anything they had ever imagined. The silence stretched on, and for a moment, Ethan wondered if he had failed. But then, slowly, a hand was raised. One of the diplomats stepped forward, his face a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "We hear you, Ethan," the diplomat said, his voice low but steady. "We will listen. We will consider what you're asking. But understand this, we can't make this decision lightly. The future of humanity is at stake, and we must be careful with whom we ally." Ethan nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I know, but I believe in the Zarin. I believe in their ability to help us, and I believe in humanity's strength to overcome whatever challenges lie ahead." And with those words, the foundation was laid. The choice had been set before them, and the future of two worlds hung in the balance. Ethan had done everything he could. Now, it was up to Earth to decide. As he looked back at Velaraya, standing silently behind him, he felt a sense of peace. They had fought for this moment, and no matter what happened next, he knew they had made the right choice.